The transmission arrived on a Tuesday, which struck many later as the most Earth-like detail of the entire affair. Not at the height of a summit, not during some globally broadcast moment of collective attention, but on a Tuesday morning when most of the planet was doing ordinary things. Traffic moved through cities. Bread baked. Somewhere in Rajasthan, a man named Rajan Chaudhary was inspecting the roots of a wheat stalk he'd pulled from cracked earth, holding it close to his face the way a doctor holds a patient's wrist. The transmission was not subtle. The Keth Dominion, which had been cataloging inhabited systems for what their records indicated was approximately 40,000 years, had assessed Earth's technological threshold, its military capacity, its resource yield, and its strategic position in the outer Carina arm. The assessment had taken 11 of their days. The resulting communication was translated by the 3 AI systems humanity had quietly trained on intercepted alien signals over the previous decade, and it arrived in 17 languages simultaneously, routed to every major governmental body on the planet. It said, in essence, you are outmatched, your resistance would be inefficient, your continued autonomy serves no productive purpose, and you have 72 hours to formally acknowledge Keth sovereignty and present a representative of your species' primary occupation for terms of integration. The Keth did not use the word surrender. They considered it imprecise. Integration was the preferred terminology. It implied absorption rather than defeat, which the Keth Dominion, in its administrative experience, found resulted in lower long-term maintenance costs. The 72 hours that followed were the most fractured period in recorded human history, and also, paradoxically, one of the most honest. Every government behaved exactly as its nature demanded. Military bodies argued for resistance and ran calculations that everyone involved understood were not calculations at all but rituals of dignity. Diplomatic corps debated the precise wording of responses that might buy time. Committees were formed. Committees debated the formation of subcommittees. The United Nations Security Council held an emergency session in which 5 permanent members each held an irreconcilable position and 3 of them held it loudly. Religious leaders issued statements. Economists issued statements. Philosophers issued statements. A surprisingly large number of people simply went about their day, because the human capacity to continue ordinary life in the face of extraordinary threat is either a profound psychological defense mechanism or evidence of a deep civilizational stubbornness that does not distinguish between the manageable and the unmanageable. The term primary occupation was the clause that eventually resolved the deadlock, though not in any way the Keth had anticipated. A junior analyst at the UN's Emergency Coordination Office, a woman named Priya Acharya who had spent 8 years in development economics before her current posting, noted in a briefing that the Keth's own phrasing was technically unambiguous. Primary occupation. Global data was clear. When you aggregated across the entire human population, the single largest occupational category on Earth, by substantial margin, was agricultural work. More humans farmed than did anything else. The Keth had asked for a representative of humanity's primary occupation. They had presumably expected a warrior, or perhaps a scientist, or a high priest of some kind, the figures that occupy the front of history books. But if the Keth wanted precision, they could have it. The suggestion was made at approximately hour 54. It was received with the particular silence that falls over rooms when something absurd is also technically correct. Then someone asked who specifically, and Priya Acharya, who had been born in the same district of Rajasthan as the man she was about to name, said that she knew a farmer who had spent 40 years cultivating wheat in one of the most hostile agricultural environments on the planet and had never once, in 4 decades, lost a full harvest to anything. Not drought. Not flood. Not blight. Not the market. She said this not as a recommendation exactly, but as the kind of observation that fills a silence when no better option presents itself. Rajan Chaudhary was 63 years old. He was not a large man. He had the particular build of someone who has performed physical labor every day of their adult life and eaten exactly enough to sustain it, lean in the way of function rather than vanity, with hands that did not match the rest of him in the way that farmers' hands often don't, knotted and brown and cracked at the knuckles in ways that spoke of something closer to geological process than human anatomy. He had completed secondary school, had 2 years of agricultural college, and had farmed a 40-acre plot of wheat and millet that had been in his family for over a century. He had a daughter who worked in Jaipur and a son who had taken up the farm beside him. He had, by his own account and the account of everyone who knew him, no remarkable characteristics whatsoever. He was, in the truest sense of the word, ordinary. He listened to Priya Acharya's explanation over a video call on a phone propped against a clay pot, and he asked 3 questions. The first was whether the people doing the asking understood that he was not a diplomat. The second was whether his son could manage the farm through the upcoming dry season without him. The third was whether the Keth ate plants. He was told that the Keth were, to the best of available knowledge, not biologically capable of consuming anything grown in Earth's soil. He nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he has received information that is interesting but does not yet change anything practical. Then he said he would need a day to prepare the soil rotation instructions for his son, and asked if they could send someone to take notes because his son sometimes forgot things when he was nervous. The Keth vessel that received humanity's representative was designated the administrative conveyance Sovereign Reach, a ship that had processed the formal integration of 37 civilizations and whose interior was designed to induce a specific psychological response in visiting species. The effect was one of scale. The ceilings were high enough to register as sky. The corridors were wide enough to make a human body feel like punctuation in a long sentence. The materials were a particular pale mineral that reflected light in a way that subtly reminded organic beings of their own softness. This was deliberate. The Keth had studied the architecture of dominance for a very long time. Rajan Chaudhary stepped off the transport shuttle carrying a cloth bag and looked around the receiving bay with the focused attention of someone estimating crop yield. He was accompanied by a translator, a young man named Dae Young Park who had spent the last 6 years as a xenolinguistics researcher and whose hands, during the shuttle ride, had not been entirely steady. Rajan had not commented on this. He had offered Dae Young some dried mango from his bag and spent most of the transit looking at photographs on his phone. The Keth official assigned to receive them was called, in their internal documentation, a tertiary consolidation administrator. The translator rendered the title as something closer to integration specialist, though Dae Young later wrote in his account of the event that neither translation captured what the Keth actually were, which was something like institutional memory given physical form. The Keth official was tall, though the Keth did not think of themselves as tall, they thought of other things as small, and was accompanied by a staff of 8, each managing different recording and assessment functions. The receiving bay held a table constructed at a height calculated to make seated humans look slightly diminished. This was also deliberate. Rajan sat down and put his bag on the table. The Keth official opened the formal session with a declaration that had been refined over 40,000 years of integration proceedings. It described the Keth Dominion's scope, its administrative history, the civilizations currently under its governance, and the terms available to Earth as a newly catalogued system. It took 14 minutes. The translator rendered it in real time, quietly, close to Rajan's ear. At the end of it, the Keth official paused in the manner that their integration protocols indicated should produce an expression of either compliance or desperation in the facing party. Rajan said, "How long have you been doing this?" The question was not on any script the Keth had prepared for. The official processed it for a moment. 42,000 years of Dominion activity, he said, 37,000 of which involved active integration. Rajan nodded again with the same slow quality he'd had on the phone call, the nod of a man who is placing information in context. He said, "My family has been farming the same land for 280 years. Same soil. Different weather every year. We've had droughts that lasted 4 years." He paused. "We've had government policies that were worse than droughts. We've had 3 different nations claim ownership of the land during my grandfather's lifetime. We're still there." The Keth official processed this and found it did not connect to any relevant integration parameter. He redirected to the terms of the agreement, which included Earth's acknowledgement of Keth sovereignty, a restructuring of resource allocation, and a period of administrative transition estimated to last approximately 200 years. Rajan said, "What happens to the people?" "They are integrated," the official said, "contributing members of a larger administrative body. Their biological functions continue. Their social units are restructured over time to align with Dominion productivity standards. Rajan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My grandfather restructured nothing. British Empire tried. Mughal administrators before them. Before that, others I don't even have names for. My grandfather's grandfather farmed. My grandfather farmed. My father farmed. I farm. My son farms. The land doesn't know about empires. It knows about rain." He pulled a small paper envelope from his bag and set it on the table. "This is wheat seed from our farm. This variety has been cultivated in our district for approximately 400 years. It is drought-resistant because it was shaped by drought. It is disease-resistant because it survived disease. Every generation of failure made it more capable of surviving the next one. It's not special. It's just very, very difficult to kill." The Keth official noted this statement for the record and moved to the compliance timeline. Earth's formal acknowledgement was required within 30 days. Resource assessment teams would arrive within 60. Transitional administrative personnel within 90. Rajan asked what happened if Earth didn't comply. The official said that non-compliance would initiate a graduated response protocol. Staged demonstration of force. Infrastructure targeting. He said it with the flatness of someone reading from a document they have read many times. Rajan listened to the translation and was quiet for what Deong Park later described as an uncomfortably long time. Not an aggressive silence. Not a defiant one. The silence of a man who is looking at a field and thinking several seasons ahead simultaneously. When he finally spoke, he said, "I've sat across from weather that was going to destroy my crop. Really sat with it, looked at what was coming, calculated what I would lose, understood that I could not stop it. And I farmed anyway. Prepared what I could prepare, accepted what I couldn't change, planted what might still survive." He looked at the Keth official directly, which their integration protocols did not specify as a meaningful gesture but which their biological sensors registered as unusual. "What you're describing is a bad season. We've had bad seasons." The meeting lasted 4 hours. In that time, the Keth official laid out the terms of integration 7 times in 7 different formulations, each version refined by 4,000 years of diplomatic processing. Each time, Rajan Chaudhary listened completely, asked 1 or 2 questions that were never the questions the official expected, and responded with something drawn from the specific, material reality of farming land in northwestern India. He did not threaten. He did not plead. He did not perform dignity or outrage or desperation. He spoke with the total calm of a man who has looked at death before, crop death, which is not metaphorical death but actual death, children going hungry, a family's continuity broken, and found that death does not negotiate and therefore there is no point in negotiating with what resembles it. At hour 3, the Keth official made an error of analysis. It was subtle and would only be identified as an error later, when the Dominion's integration specialists went over the session recordings. The official had been trained to read the integration proceedings as a ratio, the degree to which the facing party understood their position, against the degree to which they were willing to act against their own interests in resistance. A civilization that understood its position completely would capitulate. A civilization that did not understand its position would resist and be demonstrated to. The formula had held across 37 integrations. But Rajan Chaudhary presented a reading that the formula could not process. He appeared to understand his position completely and also appeared entirely uninterested in the implications of that understanding. He was not delusional about Earth's military capacity. He acknowledged it freely. He was not performing courage. He simply did not appear to find the threat load-bearing. The Keth official asked him directly, "Do you understand what the Dominion is capable of deploying against your planet?" Rajan said, "Yes." The official asked, "And you are not afraid?" Rajan was quiet for a moment and then said something that Deong Park would spend 3 years analyzing in subsequent academic work. He said, "I have knelt in soil that was dying and asked it to give me 1 more year. I've done that more times than I can count. That's a specific kind of fear. The fear that the thing you love most will not survive because you cannot make it survive through wanting. I know what that feels like. What you're describing feels different. Bigger. but less personal. I can't negotiate with a dying field. I can talk to you. At hour 4, Rajan asked if he could leave his wheat seeds with them. The Keth official processed this request and found no relevant protocol. HFY, Rajan said, because you've never grown anything. I can tell. Everything in here is built. Assembled. Nothing was cultivated. He looked around the bay with the appraising look he'd used at the beginning. You know the thing about growing something? It changes you. You stop thinking you control things. You start thinking about what conditions allow things to survive. That's a different way of thinking about a galaxy. He pushed the paper envelope across the table. They'll grow in most soil types. They're very adaptable. 40 generations of bad conditions made them that way. The Keth official did not accept the seeds. They were logged as a material artifact and placed in the vessel's analysis archives, where they were examined thoroughly over the next 11 days. What the analysis found was not strategically significant. What it found was that the seeds were exactly what Rajan said they were: old, tested, stripped of every vulnerability by generations of pressure, carrying only what was necessary to survive and generate the next generation. The Keth xenobiologists filed a report that noted this without emphasis. The report was included in the integration assessment for Earth and remained unread by the integration committee for 2 months. Rajan returned to Earth on the 4th day, having been present for 1 formal session and 2 informal observation periods during which, at the Keth's request, he had described the process of farming in greater detail. He had been thorough and patient and answered every question without defensiveness. He had described crop rotation and soil management and water retention and the specific techniques developed over centuries to coax yield from semi-arid land. He had described how farmers in his region had adapted to every change of climate, policy, economy, and governance without stopping farming, because stopping was not a concept that the land permitted. He described the monsoon the way someone describes a complicated relative, something to be worked with rather than controlled, something that had its own logic that you learned to think alongside rather than against. He went home and resumed work on the soil rotation plan he had been preparing for his son. The Keth Integration Committee convened to assess the meeting 48 hours after Rajan's return. They reviewed the session recordings and the translation annotations and the xenobiological reports. The assessment they produced was unlike any document in 37 integration cycles, which the committee chair would note in internal communications was somewhat disturbing not because of what it said but because of what it could not say. The standard integration metrics could not process the Earth representative's responses. He had not been uncooperative. He had not been dishonest. He had answered every question accurately, but the answers consistently failed to map onto any of the established behavioral matrices for civilizations at Earth's technological level. Non-compliant civilizations presented certain identifiable markers: hostility, misrepresentation of capacity, appeals to their own cultural significance, and eventually a performance of sacrifice. What Rajan Chaudhary had presented was none of these. He had presented something the committee's system categorized, after significant processing, as a problem of category. He was not behaving as a representative of a threatened civilization. He was behaving as something that did not find itself threatened in a way it recognized. The committee chair sent an inquiry to the Xenobiological Archive and received the report on the wheat seeds 2 days later. She read it 3 times. Then she pulled every piece of data they had collected on the human species over the 11 days of assessment and read that differently, with the particular attention of someone who has realized they may have been reading the wrong document. What the data showed was not what it had seemed to show. Earth's military capacity was accurately assessed. Earth's technological level was accurately assessed. What had not been assessed because it had not seemed relevant was a set of patterns that ran through every piece of human historical data like load-bearing threads. Every technology humanity had been developed under pressure. Every civilization structure had been built on the ruins of the previous one. Every social system had been designed by people who had lived through the failure of another social system. The Keth had 40,000 years of administrative history and had refined their governance to a point of elegant efficiency. Humans had 10,000 years of agricultural history and had refined almost nothing because the conditions kept changing. What they had developed instead was a system-level tolerance for impermanence, a civilizational immune response to disruption that was not elegant at all but was extraordinarily, perhaps uniquely, difficult to defeat. The wheat seeds sat in the analysis archive and were not returned. The integration timeline passed without implementation. The committee's recommendation, submitted to the Dominion's upper administrative body 6 weeks after Rajan's departure, was not a recommendation of force. It was a recommendation of extended assessment. The document's third section, which the committee chair drafted personally, contained a passage that would be referenced in Keth administrative literature for generations afterward, translated variously but always preserving the central image. We have integrated civilizations that fought us, and civilizations that surrendered, and civilizations that believed they were special, and civilizations that believed they were chosen. We have not previously encountered a civilization that simply did not recognize the frame. This is not a tactical position. It cannot be addressed with a tactical response. We are not sure it can be addressed at all, which is itself information of the most significant kind. Rajan Chaudhary learned about the assessment extension from Priya Acharya, who called him on a Thursday morning while he was in the field. She explained what had happened in broad terms, that the Keth had paused the integration process, that Earth's status was now under review rather than actively proceeding, that no one was entirely certain what this meant but that most people were interpreting it as favorable. She said that a lot of people wanted to thank him. She said that some people wanted to write about what he had done. She asked if he would be willing to speak to the UN committee at some point. He said he would, but that it would need to wait 2 weeks because the wheat was close to ready and he wanted to be there for the harvest. He thanked her for calling and ended the call and went back to work. That evening, sitting on the edge of the field in the particular quality of light that falls in Rajasthan at the end of a harvest day, he pulled up the photographs he'd been looking at on the shuttle and found the one he'd been looking for. His father, young, kneeling in the same field with a stalk of wheat in both hands. The field was smaller then. The stalk looked the same. He looked at it for a while, not with grief exactly and not with pride exactly, but with the specific feeling of a man who has continued something that was already old when it was handed to him. The Keth did not return to Earth for 11 years. When they did, it was not with integration personnel. It was with a different kind of team, smaller, with different instrumentation, asking different questions. They did not come to the capital cities. They sent their team to agricultural regions. They observed. They documented. They were, by all accounts, quieter than anyone expected. In the Dominion's internal archives, the Earth file was reclassified under a designation that had only been used twice before in 40,000 years. The rough translation is something close to unresolved variable, though xenolinguists have argued that the more accurate rendering is something that changes the equation. The file notes were updated once, by the committee chair, shortly before her administrative retirement. The note read, "They sent us a farmer because he was statistically representative." They did not know this was the correct answer. Neither did he. That combination, the accurate answer and the absence of strategy behind it, is what we have no framework for. What you cannot predict, you cannot contain. What you cannot contain, you must eventually understand. We have not understood this yet. That is the file's current status. The wheat seeds were still in the archive. No one had thrown them away. No one had decided what to do with them. They remained in their paper envelope, old and tested and dense with everything 40 generations of difficult conditions had bred out of them, waiting with the particular patience of things that know how to wait. Rajan's son harvested that year without losing a single acre. It was not a remarkable harvest by any external measure. It was adequate, which in the vocabulary of farming means something different than it does elsewhere. It means, we continue. It means, next year we try again. It means, the field is still ours, the soil still capable, the seeds still viable, the work still worth doing. In the vastness of a galaxy administered by an entity that had processed the surrender of 37 civilizations, that was, in the end, what had changed everything. Not a weapon. Not a strategy. Not a speech. A man who had never learned to think of continuity as something that could be threatened into stopping, because the land had taught him, over and over, season after season, in the specific dialect of soil and rain and loss, that it could not. The Keth were very old, but they had never farmed. That, the committee chair had written in her final note, is the detail we should have looked for first.